So, I don't think I ever covered my actual psychotic worldview. Uh, and like I say, these little uploads, these audio journals, are, in my opinion, really far more for a look into my madness, my sin, my errors in judgment, my darkness, than they are of anything that I would consider to be of the light. So, in other words, these aren't to be taken literally, they aren't to be taken at face value or anything, and they aren't an official part of the canon of the theory or even my religion, etc. And so, there's so much to cover. The first thing I think I want to cover is the religion. So, my personal religion, which, to be frank with you, whoever you are, I think that every person has the right to form their own relationship with God, and if they do so, how would I even put this? Systematically, if they form a system or a belief system, a dogmatic belief system, if they form a dogma that they adhere to, that whether it's the Ten Commandments were direct divine revelation from God to Moses, that Jesus physically walked on water, resurrected the dead, defeated death, all that stuff. Whatever you want to believe, or what is that stone that supposedly came from a meteorite that was supposedly given to the Prophet Muhammad and all that stuff. So whatever you want to believe, that's up to each individual. I believe. I believe that it's up to each individual to find their own relation with God, and I think that they're all going to be unique. And this is the really weird thing that kind of threw me for a loop: is all of our beliefs are wrong. Firstly, because they all contradict each other, and secondly, because they're all finite. And yet, we know intuitively that the world is bigger than we can comprehend, that reality is more complex than we can ever grasp. It will always be that way. It's always been that way. It will always be that way. And if we can't even comprehend God's creation, then of course we cannot comprehend God in totality. So we all form false beliefs. We are doomed to have false beliefs. But God, knowing that because of our nature, because we are sinners, because we are finite, we don't understand the infinite. We can't, because we aren't infinite ourselves. And it is that infinitude that makes God God and us us. It's why God is God and we are who we are. It's because we are the finite in the face of the infinite. And we have that chance then to always grow closer to the infinite and away from the darkness and zero. Which is my, I believe, analogous entity to Lucifer or Satan is zero. And I liken infinity to God. They aren't the same thing, but they lead and point to the same things. Infinity points to God. God is not the infinite, but God is even beyond that, because God created the infinite. God is even more infinite than infinite, if that makes sense. God is beyond real rather than unreal. And again, this is all by necessity. It's not arbitration that any of that is true. It is necessarily the case that the cause cannot be the same thing as the effect. Nothing causes itself. So reality cannot have caused itself, because it didn't exist before itself to bring itself into existence. There is no such thing as bootstrapping oneself into existence. So it's not possible. Now, I did come up with a causally dynamic origin of reality, being from the three absolutes of nothing, indiscernibility, and being, all of which cause each other. But again, we run into the bootstrapping problem: is who did it first? Or how is it the case that not yet being created, they still have these relations? It's just not possible. There always has to be something before that. So there has to be a God that created everything, or whatever you want to call it. You can call it whatever you want, but it is God. It's someone or something that is beyond creation, that is beyond reality, that's beyond the limits of our comprehension, and that is the creator of everything that we can comprehend. And that's all necessary. It is not possible for everything to exist without there being something more than everything. And what could that possibly be? You can't come up with anything other than a God to fill that role. There is no logically discernible, rational entity that could possibly fill that void. It's too large. So I believe in God, or as I put it, I know that there is a God because of that. Now, in addition to that, you don't have to deify it. You could even call it nothing. And actually, I've made systems that have that as the case. It is logically viable for someone to say that everything came from nothing, and that because nothing can create itself, that it must then have been the origin of reality. And then you go from nothing to the consequence of nothing happening, which is indiscernibility, which is the act of nothing being nothing. And then from the juxtaposition of indiscernibility and nothing, you've got being, which spans the distance between the exact origin, which is nothing, and the terminus of that origin, which is indiscernibility. So that's how, in the same instant, nothing happens, and that nothing happening creates indiscernibility. And so that's why that actually does work and is a logically viable alternative to God. You can believe that we all were created from nothing, because when nothing is, then we have indiscernibility by default. That's the only possible thing that we can derive from nothing being nothing, because that's a paradox. And as logic states, as far as I know, there's a way of arguing anything, literally anything, from a self-contradiction, from something equivalent to P and not P, a proposition which conjunctively combines a variable and its negation. In this case, it would be nothing and indiscernibility, which are both negations of each other as well as negations of being. They're all negations of each other. And those, whether it began with nothing or whether it began simultaneously nothing, indiscernibility, and being, because of God, which is what I believe, they are both equally viable options. I'm sure there's even a third, which is that we just don't know. Because of the fact that we can't tell which is which of those, then we can't tell anything, absolutely. If we can't even tell the difference between those two things, which are vastly different, then we can't tell anything. And so I guess that would be the third option, is some form of agnosticism. I haven't yet to see anything compelling swaying me to either side, and so I have to remain agnostic about it, because I don't have enough information and never will have enough information to go one way or the other. And that is true. That's an equally valid position to the other two positions already stated. So those are the three ways that a person can look at the reason as to why we exist, but they're the only three that I'm aware of that are viable, that are logically valid and could be empirically sound. But because they're so at the absolute beginning of everything, then there cannot ever be anything that checks that. So unfortunately, it is unfalsifiable. So you just have to choose one of those by faith and by arbitration. And of course, knowing God and the complexity of reality, it's probably some combination of those three. It probably has something to do with, well, you just get to choose whichever one you want. And that's the point, is the freedom to choose from those three different ways of looking at the origin of reality. So that you're not stuck between choosing heaven and hell. You're not being tyrannically enslaved by some feudal overlord from, the Bronze Age. That's just as advanced as we could look at God at the time. That's not an accurate representation of God. The irony being, if you follow the Ten Commandments, you can't follow the Ten Commandments. Why? Because you can't have a graven image. And what is the Ten Commandments other than a graven image? It shows you what God's will is. If you think that's the extent of God's will, then you could exclude anyone that doesn't follow that and kill them mercilessly, ruthlessly, obliterate them as if they had no soul to begin with. And I don't think that that sits well enough with me for me to accept that. I could be wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it's wrong for me. I can't follow that. Here's another thing that I've often considered, is that I could be wrong. Maybe I'm the Antichrist. Maybe I'm the exact opposite of what I should be. Maybe I'm as far from God as you could ever get. And I don't know, because, again, it's unfalsifiable. There's no way of knowing. So, it's left open for a reason, and I think the openness is the point, is that you get to make your own choice. And that's what makes reality worth living. That's what makes life exciting, is that you can always choose. Every moment you can choose what you want to do and how you want to do it. And it's all up to you. You have an infinite number of possibilities, and I think that's the point. That's the intrinsic value of existence, is that it always grows. So, with that being a very rosy, poetic beginning that I find very pleasant, let's get into some things that might not be quite so pleasant. And that's my psychosis. So I told this to several people over the years, there is no real way of describing what it is to go insane, because it's a complete worldview shift. Most people believe that there's a limit to things that are possible. By the time you go crazy, I don't know if it happens before, during, or after a person goes crazy, but at some point when you go crazy, you start believing in things that are, by the conventional system of thought, to be impossible. You start believing in things that most people would never believe are possible, like that you can talk to God directly, that you're so special, that you're the most special of all the humans that have ever lived. And I felt like that. Now, it could be good. It makes you feel powerful, but it's also bad because it makes you feel responsible. And then you feel guilty because you're not perfect. And so how can you have all this power, but you don't have enough knowledge to know how to use it? And so then you end up with this fear that, paranoid schizophrenic nightmare that I've had and that I've heard about other people also having. And the way that it happens is it's a slip. You don't try to do it. It doesn't take any effort. It actually takes effort not to do it. It takes effort to stop doing it. You have to put the brakes on, because it's like, I swear, the only way that I can analogously put it, the only way that I could put it into an analogy would be, if the mind is a car, the mind of my crazy mind would be like tires screeching. The wheels are spinning so fast. The RPMs are so high. It is churning so fast. But because it's spinning so fast, it goes nowhere. It doesn't get any traction because the world is not like that. It's not moving that fast already. The car is not already that moving at that velocity. It's standing still. And to try to go from standing still 0 to 60 in half a second, you're not going to do it. It's just not going to happen. So when you attempt to do it, it's like trying to jump into the sky. It's like trying to jump into flying. It's just not possible to do. So you have to put brakes on it. And what I did, what happened to me that started my psychotic thing, is the belief that I could hear God, that I could see signs and visions, and that there was a forbidden knowledge that I had sold my soul to the devil for. And the reason for that is because I had to try to explain to myself or my subconscious and try to justify it with some logic. And I had to make a backstory for my origin. And my origin is that I really, really, really like learning about ontological truths, the essence of existence, and how God created everything. Why are we here, and all of that. And that's not knowledge that we're supposed to have, because if you read Genesis, it says that the knowledge of good and evil, which would make us like God, which is exactly what I wanted, is forbidden. So it combined that with my blossoming self-hatred and guilt over all the things that I hadn't done well enough, or hadn't yet accomplished, or I didn't think about other people. I threw them away. I was very ungrateful. There's a lot of things that I did that I regretted, and a lot of baggage and self-loathing that I carried over from as a kid. And so this explained that to me in at least some way. And it said to me, if I found myself with this dilemma, that I have this insatiable lust for knowledge, but also this self-loathing and a feeling of darkness and evil, then maybe I'm the Antichrist. Maybe that's in my timeline, that's in my purview, that is a possibility that I could choose. And I think that there's three possibilities, three main branches for my lifeline. My timeline for my life has three main branches, I believe. One of which is the Antichrist branch. That branch happens, that variant, I usually call it a variant, that variant happens. I have three variants, three main archetypal variants in my life. And one of them is the Antichrist. The other one is Michael the Archangel, and the third one would just be what I call the dreamer in the dream, which is basically, it's not a scientist, but it's kind of like somebody that views everything technologically and is agnostic. That doesn't necessarily negate God, doesn't believe that everything started out of nothing, but also that doesn't necessarily believe in God either, but just sort of treats everything from a technological standpoint and focuses more on how everything works rather than why. And it leaves the why up to other people. So those three main approaches to life have their own stories. The story of the Antichrist is that I was wronged because I got put into a position that I didn't get to choose. No one gets to choose where they get born, or at least no one gets to choose whether or not they exist. They're thrust into existence, or existence is thrust into them, depending on how you look at it. You could look at God's impregnation of Mary as rape because he never asked for her consent. I mean, there's things like that you can believe, and it's logically valid to do so. There's no logical argument against that. But, it does tend to go against the traditional norms and deities thereof. So that might be good or bad for a person depending on how they're standing, where they're standing at. So I had done that for a while because, in my opinion, if a theory is worth its salt, then it can't be destroyed. So if I take the destructive route, I should be unsuccessful. If I found a theory that's worth keeping, I should not be able to destroy it. So that's what I did. And I took that route. It was the simplest, and everything always starts off as a weapon, because it's the easiest thing to do is to destroy something. It's very difficult to create. It's very easy to destroy. You can destroy without even knowing what you're doing. You cannot create something without knowing what you're doing. what was I going to say? Oh, the options of being in one of those three variants depends on my approach to existence. If I think that the world is unjust, if I think that existence is unjust, if I think God is unjust for having made us exist rather than allowing us to exist, I don't even know how that would be possible. Therefore, if I then take the idea that nothing is perfect, that everything should have just remained nothing and never existed to begin with, I can argue that view, and that view just leads to the destruction of all things. Now, even that is pointless, because if I did destroy all things, even according to that own view, I would cause nothing to happen again. I would cause nothing to pervade all of being again, if I were successful, let's say. If I got what I wanted, then I wouldn't have room for what I wanted, because the wanting would displace nothing, because wanting is not nothing. So even wanting nothing is a paradox, but having nothing is also a paradox. I wouldn't be around to have it, and even if it did happen, as soon as nothing happens, you've got indiscernibility again, and then you've got being again, and then you've got another reality again, and then another variant of reality forms. And so the only thing that you could ever succeed in doing is stopping existence for that iteration and cutting that branch off, but then it just regrows again as a new variant. And so it just makes things slightly different. It makes them decoratively different. But from that standpoint, nothing changed. It was all the same anyway. And so that's that view. And a lot of people have it. And if they don't have it completely, then they have it in bits. You know, everybody feels it sometimes, is that nihilistic disbelief and disillusionment and everything. It's like, oh, well, all this is just a bunch of crap. It's just a bunch of garbage. Everybody feels like that sometimes. That's that view. I took that view so seriously that I was able to construct an entire theory out of it. And I think that that's actually what the perfection of nihilism was always supposed to be. You can build an entire system out of that. And it is self-refuting, just like nihilism is, when it states that there are no values or that there are no truths, which itself cannot then be true. So it's stuff like that that makes me think that I found that actual system. And it's just the system that believes in a linear origin from nothing toward being, back to nothing again, in a constant cycle. And the best that you can do with that is that you could argue that at least right now, I have the opportunity to engage in all sorts of frivolous, superfluous activities. But at the end of it, it's pointless, because I just end up getting obliterated at the end of it anyway. And we all will. And then I don't really like that view, but some people do. Some people like it, but whatever. So there's that. Then the other lifeline or branch of my lifeline that I've got is Michael the Archangel. And I don't know exactly how to play that one out yet, because I find it kind of pretentious that I would attempt to do that, because it's a noble route, and it would then place me in a position of, great importance. So I prefer to think of myself as more like the dreamer in the dream. I'm another guy like everyone else, except that I believe in the intrinsic value of knowledge. I have a great faith in logic and deductive reasoning. And that's the only distinction that I would have in relation to anyone else, because ethically, I'm not that great. I'm not the worst, but I'm not the best. So the most accurate one is probably that one. But what that requires is that I just stay agnostic about everything. And I say, there really is no rational position that we can justify with logic to take on either side. If you say that you believe in God, there's no evidence to believe in God, but there's also no evidence to believe that God doesn't exist. There's no evidence on either side. So you can't make a decision because there's no evidence to do that. There's no way to prove it or disprove it. So you can't really take either position. But then again, that's a paradox, because by not taking either position, you take a position. Again, still without any evidence. So they're all equally frivolous. They're all equally arbitrary. And that's kind of a joke, and it might not be a good one, but that's what existence is. That's what everything in creation is. And so, You can take it in all kinds of different ways. But I believe that so long as I don't forget that it is possible that the Bible is true, it is possible that it's supposed to be taken literally. Anything is possible because nothing is impossible. Therefore, yes, it is possible that that's the case, and I have to consider it. I have to take that into consideration, and I did when I wrote my system, and I'm going to try to continue to do that too. Even though I don't believe that it's true personally, I'm afraid of it. I don't want to violate it unless it's necessary to violate it. So far I haven't run across anything that makes it necessary to violate it, at least absolutely. And I don't think I'm going to make the system overtly religious, although, again, I am. But I don't think that the system should reflect that. I think people should be allowed to view reality however they want. So I'm not going to build that directly into the legal system, but the legal system is a reflection of what I believe to be ethical. And I systematized that because I needed to reflect it into reality. And that's the only way that I know how to do that. If I did it any other way, it would have just been arbitrary and it would have been a cult of personality. But this can be extended indefinitely. Anybody, any rational being can, or at least when I finish writing it, should be able to follow the book and come to the same conclusions, regardless of who it is that's reading it, as long as they're rational. Because the entire thing is just based off deductive reasoning. So it can't take any of those three views as a favorite view. It has to display all three as equally valid and show that, there's no way of picking, and there's arguably an infinite number of other alternatives too. It's not just those three, it's everything. It's every possible thing you could ever think of, all having an equal possibility of being true. So with all of that, the psychosis that I had started with that belief that it started not abruptly. It happened slowly. It happened choppily. It happened in fits and starts. There were a few intense episodes that led up to a full-blown florid psychotic long-term, I wouldn't even say episode, but saga. And then, lately it's been regressed back into episodic psychosis where I slip into that and I believe it again, that I'm the Antichrist and I can hear God and all this stuff. I slip into that, but it'll only happen maybe a few times a week, and it only happens for a few minutes, maybe an hour. Whereas it used to last for several days, weeks, months, sometimes years, where I stayed in a psychotic state the entire day, screaming at the sky and arguing with God and believing I was the devil or the Antichrist or some supernatural entity, all kinds of stuff like that I was on a mission, all of this stuff that most, if not all, psychotics experience. And like I said, it's easy to get stuck in because you can't ever prove that wrong. You can't ever prove to me that I'm not the Antichrist. You can't prove to me that I am. There's no way of proving it either way. And over time, I started to recognize the foolishness of acting on something that I can't prove. If I can't prove it, let's say I'm going to try to figure out the guilt or innocence of some defendant that's on trial. If I don't have any solid evidence against the guy, then I can't convict him because I don't know. I have to know. If I don't know, then I have to assume the best. I have to give him the benefit of the doubt. I can't judge. So if I don't know if I am the Antichrist or not, then I have to consider it as a possibility. And that's scary. So then what do you do? Because that's so scary that you'll get sucked into it and you'll start thinking, if you start taking that seriously, it'll take up all your time, because if you really were the Antichrist, then you would have to really try hard not to be. You'd have to change your whole life. You'd have to change everything you believe in. You'd have to, all of that stuff would have serious, ramifications for continuing blindly. So, given that you would care about the eternal state of your soul, you would drastically change your life in order to reflect that so that you don't go to hell. Well, that now you're taking up all your time and you're talking to God all the time because you could die at any moment. So you need to make amends with God immediately. So you're constantly talking to God. So then you don't have any time for work, and then you stop brushing your teeth or doing anything else because that's all, pointless. And in consideration that you're about to burn in hell for being the Antichrist, you have to atone for your sins. So you don't have time to brush your teeth. That doesn't mean anything. You'll be dead in 2 weeks anyway. So that's why all of that stuff happens. The social withdrawal, no one can relate to that. I mean, how are you supposed to interact with someone like that? And then how are they supposed to interact with anyone else? They can't go to a party while they think that they're the Antichrist. They can't go out and have fun while they think that they've got the devil possessing them, or that the CIA is listening through some radio device in their tooth. I mean, there's no way to sit still with that. You can't just be okay with that. That kind of a story is so extreme that you can't function, and hence they can't function. So what I had to do was I had to say, I can't live like this anymore, and I have to get out of this situation, and I have to do everything in my power to get out of it because it's a struggle, and I have to be consistent. That was the thing that got me out, was consistency. I made it impossible to fail. I did things over and over and over and over exactly the same way I was having to do it to get it done. And it took that. It took 3 times for every single step. I didn't have a phone. Then I tried to get a phone. Well, you can't because Medicaid ran out, so you got to call Medicaid. You got to reinstate that. Now you got to go over to the clinic, get checked out, whatever it is. And then you take care of all that. Then you qualify. Then you have to go back and get the phone. Then you have to wait for it to get shipped, or, you have to activate it or whatever it is. And so you got to go find a Wi-Fi station and blah, blah, blah. So, because you're homeless, you don't have your own Wi-Fi. You got to go somewhere else to go get it. And you're homeless, so you can't pay for it at Starbucks or something like that. I guess you could walk outside their building and steal it, which I've done. But, they're not always there. Sometimes you have to walk quite a ways. And if that's too far away from the shelter, then you can't access it because you can't get all the way there and back and still get food. You don't have enough time. They only feed at certain times. So, it really restricts things because you have no transportation, but yet you have an extremely restricted window within which you can actually access your benefits that you need to survive, like food and sleeping and all that stuff. So it's difficult. But if you're consistent, then you can get out. And I didn't even try to figure out if I was or wasn't the Antichrist anymore. I just gave up on trying to figure it out, and I said, I got to table this for now. I got to put that on the back burner and just focus on whether, even if I am or not, irregardless, I have to get this phone. So, I get the phone. Like I said, I had to jump through a whole bunch of hoops to get it. It took fucking forever. And then after I got it, somebody steals it. I got to go get another one and go through the same process. It took a few tries. And I had to keep going through this over and over and over. And eventually, because I stuck with it, and I did it over and over and over again, even though I didn't have to do that. I should have only had to do it once, but because of all this craziness, I had to do it multiple times. And I did. And I got it. And then it was the same thing when I tried to get a job. I applied to all places, King's Supers, McDonald's, Taco Bell, all kinds of places. Rejection, nothing, no response. And then finally, after I would say a couple months of every single day firing off 100 fucking applications all over the goddamn place to everybody, I finally get a call back. And then I went to the interview and I got the job. And so then I got out of the homelessness situation. But god damn it took a lot of effort and struggling to get out of there. And the only way that I could do it is, like I said, to be consistent and to focus on the plan of getting off the street, irregardless of whether I'm the Antichrist or not, irregardless of whether or not I have a telepathic connection with everyone around me. They can hear my thoughts Because, oh my God, that was so scary to think that everybody around me could hear my thoughts. I remember that. But like I said, you say, I don't care if they can or not. I can't live on the street. Whether people can hear my thoughts or not, I still can't live on the street. It's just something I can't do. I can't do it when they can hear my thoughts. I can't do it when they can't hear my thoughts. I can't do it. So I got to get off the street. So that's how I got it. That's how I got to that situation. Now, a lot of them, for a long time, I remember being in the position where I just didn't give a shit because I thought I deserved it. I was so filled with self-loathing that I was like, well, if I'm the Antichrist, then I deserve to be out here. And also, no one's going to hire me because they can all read my thoughts. They all know I'm the Antichrist. So they're not going to hire me. There's a conspiracy against me. They all know who I am, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of people go through this type of shit. And it leads to homelessness because you get so afraid that you can't risk your life to go talk to somebody about it because you could die. You could burn in hell too. It's not even just risking your life. It's risking your soul to go talk to somebody and ask for help. Depending on the psychotic story that they believe, they might be having to do that. They might be having to pick between burning in hell for an eternity and just suffering through some mortal extreme pain, but still just mortal pain. And any finite amount of pain is nothing in comparison with the infinite. So you just don't go there. You just don't ever try. You don't ever speak up because you're risking your soul to do so. So it's extremely isolating. It's extremely difficult. You don't ever get a wink of sleep. You're constantly fucking wound tight as fuck. You don't ever get to relax. You can't stop looking over your shoulder. And then that just all compounds because if you can't sleep, then you're all freaked out, frazzled anyway. And that's going to make your mind think even weirder. And then you're going to think that people are fucking with you even more. And so it just compounds. And like I said, the only thing that fixed it for me was I said, irregardless of all of that, I need to focus on getting off the streets. And then I consistently stuck with that, regardless of whatever happened. I had this plan. I had this planner thing. I had this thing telling me, okay, on Tuesday, you go do this at 5 o'clock, blah, blah, blah. And I had my little schedule, and I followed that schedule, irregardless. Because I was like, it doesn't matter which route it is. It doesn't matter what happens. I can't live like this anymore. And that's what it took for me. And so, like I said, there are times still to this day that I'll slip and I'll find myself back in that again, where I think everyone can hear my thoughts and I think everyone's talking in this special language and only I can hear it, or that they, are being puppeted by some other unknown, possibly supernatural entity. And again, these are all unfalsifiable claims. How do I know that everybody else around me isn't some doppelganger or some simulated avatar NPC character? How do I know that they aren't possessed by a demon? How do I know that I'm not in hell and this is all just a nightmare? How do I know? I don't. And so, that's the slip. That's the danger. And so anybody can slip because there's unfalsifiable positions all over the place, whether it's God or if it's life after death or if it's, whether demonic possession, Ouija boards, tarot cards, lucky numbers. It could even be stupid little superstitions. If I don't have my lucky rabbit's foot, then I can't sing good, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's a full spectrum from silly little superstitions all the way to full-blown dogma, and everything in between. But yeah, you can really fall off the deep end. And the difference between a religious nut and somebody going through a floridly psychotic episode is that the religious nut is humble enough to realize that he's just some guy. The crazy person thinks that they're special in either a good or a bad way. Either they're Christ or they're the Antichrist, or they're some demon or they're some angel or something like that. Or they're being persecuted by the CIA because they know too much. They found the secret, whatever it is. It's not necessarily that they're so smart. It's just that they have some kind of forbidden knowledge, or they're in a forbidden position or something like that. They're not supposed to be there. There's something wrong. And I've heard this too, that psychosis has something to do with an overstimulation of this part of the brain that tells you that there's something wrong. even if there isn't something wrong, it's going off and it's telling you there's something wrong when you're just sitting there and everything's fine, but it's saying there's something wrong. It's like an alarm going off in your head that's, it's like the car alarm. Somebody accidentally bumped your car because they tripped. And it's like that all the time in your head. So that's, fairly accurate. It's not exact, but it's fairly accurate from my experience. So it's just something that it never leaves, though. Once you have it happen, or at least for me, once I had it happen, even though it only happens as the exception now instead of the rule, it still happens. And I can fall into it at any time. And I don't take medication for it. I don't believe in that because medication doesn't solve shit. That's an acute response. If somebody's trying to actively kill someone, you give them Seroquel to knock them out, put them under sedation, But you don't give them that every single day, irregardless of what they're doing. That's just insane. It's crazy. That's like spanking a kid every single day because, well, I know you must have done something wrong. That's not, discipline. That's abuse. That's not therapy. That's drug dealing. That's getting the pharmaceutical companies rich. I can see giving somebody Seroquel in the moment when they're like, oh, I'll kill you, you demon. And so you got to put them down. You got to sedate them because they're a threat to someone in the present moment. And so you give them an acute response. Here's some fucking Thorazine. Okay, now shh. And go in the padded room and get your fucking demons out. Scream at the walls, whatever. We'll come back in a few hours and we'll see if you're all right. And then we'll let you out of your straitjacket. You go back to your room. Okay, we'll talk about it tomorrow. That's how you deal with it. You don't give them drugs every single day to try to somehow prevent them from doing it because, as everyone knows, they're just going to do it again. The body's going to get tolerant to it. I mean, it's stupid. It's like prescribing somebody antibiotics because you're trying to prevent them from getting an infection. It's like, no, the only thing you're doing is just creating antibiotic-resistant infections. That's an overprescription of antibiotics. Now, that's not going to serve anyone but the pharmaceutical companies selling those pills. It's not doing the patient any good because they're not even sick and they're getting prescribed this. And it's not doing the community any good because it's creating antibacterial resistant diseases. So now what are they going to do when they get this infection? They can't take antibiotics now because you overprescribed it. And now the virus has learned to adapt to that antibiotic pill and it doesn't work for shit. And so what are you going to do when somebody gets sick now? Let them die and just see if they survive it by nature? It's stupid, and that's what they've done. They've made it so that people have to get prescribed Zoloft because they felt sad one day. It's just stupid. It's an overprescription to try to sell as many pills as possible. And this is another thing that I've been thinking about is what is the purpose of the empire? Because the purpose of this place, of Charles' system, is overproduction. No matter what you're doing, you're always producing more. But there's no reason to produce it because there's no one there that wants to buy it. It's an overproduction of silly, frivolous items, posters and trinkets and finger spinners and and consumables up the ass, beer, wine, all kinds of things, fast food, stuff that just evaporates right after you buy it. Gone, no more money. And you don't have anything to show for it a few hours after you spend it. So that's Charles's system. And so you have to go back to work to get more money so you can buy more consumables so that it goes away again. And then you got to go buy more burgers. And you got to go back to work so you can get the money to go buy more burgers. And it goes around and around and around and around. But all you end up with at the end of that is just a shit ton of burgers. And who the fuck only wants to eat cheeseburgers for the rest of their life? There should be something more than that. So Marx had that part right. But unfortunately, he didn't have the right solution. He got the problem, but he didn't get the solution. The solution is that, in my opinion, that you give people a mega structure for them to work on. So let them work on building the city that they live in. That's a mega structure. And you can have them build a wall, part of the wall, or paint part of a mural. Contribute in some way to their community in building something that's going to last. That's the key, is it needs to last. And it needs to be something that they see every day, that they live with, that they feel connected to, and that would then make them feel better. It's not about producing things. It's about being part of a community, building a community. It's not producing things. It's building a community. And the difference is that the production rate of the United States is unchecked. There is no brake on that car. It has no brakes. It just goes forward faster and faster and faster, and it's addicted. And at this point, if people were to stop buying frivolous nonsense on Amazon, the whole economy would tank. It's so addicted to this constant consumption, this rapid, crazy addiction to consumption, and this overproduction where everybody's working overtime all the time. What are we building? I mean, look around you. Do you see anything that great? Why are we working so hard to build this place that's mediocre? Well, it's so that we can fill it with an everlasting supply of yet more cheeseburgers. So my system, on the other hand, people will build megastructures, meaning that the locals will build their own cities and they'll defend them. With the military, they're not going to be drafted, of course. Everything's a choice. You don't ever get drafted. Even if there's a war, there is no draft. If we all die, it's because no one bothered to sign up. I'm not going to make them. If you don't want to have a country, then I guess they'll just get lost. I'm not going to force someone to defend themselves. How do you even do that? How do you force someone to defend themselves? I mean, if you're going to force someone to do something, don't they need defense against you? So I'm not going to do a draft or anything. I'm just saying that they'll be connected to their community. They'll build it, protect it, run it, own it, know it, be part of it, and contribute to it. And then the other thing is that I believe in lifelong learning. I do think that that's a necessary thing to keep your mind sharp. I remember when I got out of college, and then I tried to go back in a few years after I went to the military. I did a tour, and then I came back 4 years afterwards, and I tried to go to college again, and it was so difficult because I hadn't used my brain in 4 years. I was in the military. You don't use your brain in the military. You just follow orders. You don't think at all. So my mind was totally atrophied, starving. And it took a while for me to exercise it back up to an even barely functioning level, and I never got back to my full sharpness, and I still don't have it today. In fact, I'd be horrified. If I went back to college, I'd flunk. There'd be no way for me to pass now. So I believe in lifelong learning also, where people learn because they like to learn. I believe in that too. If they don't want to, they don't have to. I'm just saying I'd rather see someone do that than make another cheeseburger. Hey, let's go make another cheeseburger. Hey, let's go make another cheeseburger. Let's just stop it with the damn cheeseburgers. I think we've had enough of those. And, go learn something. Go try to learn calculus or something like that. Just because you appreciate learning. And then the third thing that people could do, instead of just overproduction, would be personal growth in whatever area that they believe would better themselves, and take themselves seriously and try to grow themselves the same way that they would grow a career or grow a family or grow anything. They try to grow themselves. So character development, introspection, meditation, even talking to other people, maybe an old person, what do you have as far as wisdom to distill down to me? What would you wish that you knew when you had a chance to change it? And what was that would have changed it? Things like that. And you grow yourself. And those three things, I'm sure everybody could find at least one of those three things to be to their liking. And I think that ideally people should have a balance of all three of those. But I would much prefer seeing our excess in passions be directed toward one of those three things, or ideally all three, rather than overproduction of making yet more cheeseburgers, because we just don't need any more cheeseburgers, guys. We are making way too many cheeseburgers.